Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you my very first Goosebumps HorrorLand book review. It's about time. I've been waiting for the right moment to review one of these, and I think this is the great place to start at. It's book number 4, The Scream of the Haunted Mask. I have here today my Popeyes edition, kind of pocket-sized version. I have a regular copy here for comparison. As you can see, Scream of the Haunted Mask, the full book size is just like your normal standard book, and this is like a pocket-sized version. In the Popeyes version, it contains the main story, the first I think 100 to 105 pages of the book, which in HorrorLand, in case you're not familiar, for the first 10 books, what would happen is they would have an A story that took over majority of the book, around 100 or so pages, give or take, and then there was a secondary story I'm calling Enter HorrorLand as a whole, that runs about the remainder of the book, what it can run between 30 to 50 pages. It depends on what book you're reading. I have decided to save the Enter HorrorLand segment from the HorrorLand books, specifically from books 1 through 10, and save them for their own individual review, all in one video, and treat it like one concentric story. So at one point, when I'm done reviewing all 10 of these first 10 HorrorLand books, I will get to that Enter HorrorLand story. So let's get into my thoughts off the bat. I was really excited to read this. As a matter of fact, this was one of the very first books I picked up when I got into collecting. This was something I wanted to try, but I was waiting to try it because I wanted to see a couple things here. When I read the back, I noticed that Carly Beth was back as a protagonist. And I'm going to be honest, as somebody who's a diehard Haunted Mask fan, and I treat the Haunted Mask as the true mascot of Goosebumps for me, it was the gateway story that got me into the world of Goosebumps by watching the episode as a kid. And that book was one of the first 10 books I ever read. And it's honestly still one of my all-time favorites today. This book, I'm not going to lie, I may have put on a bit of a pedestal here. I had high expectations with this, coming back with Carly Beth, because Carly Beth, without a shred of a doubt, if she's not the most popular Goosebumps protagonist, I mean, she's definitely up there. If she's not the most popular, she is. And I would actually make the claim that she is the most popular, but that can be debatable here. But anyways, I had high expectations going into this. And after reading this, A story, the main story that I was mainly interested in reading here, I came out satisfied. I was more pleasantly surprised than, outright satisfied, I would say. Because as a fan of Haunted Mask, as the fan of the first book specifically, this is something I wouldn't even think I would technically ask for something like this. This is something I would probably, if this was given on an option list, I would be like, I don't want this. But it is good. I will say this. I definitely recommend trying this book out. And it did live up to some expectations of mine as well. So much so that there are some elements to this book that I prefer over all of the other Haunted Mask books and stories that are out there. I think this story kind of separates itself from the rest of the pack, and that's a good compliment for it. And I'll get into that later on in the review, of course, but yeah, off the bat, I definitely recommend this if you have not tried this story. So let's get into the plot overview without giving too much away. This is a very short story I'm going to be covering here, so it's easy to spoil a lot, and there's also really not all that much to spoil, so we'll get right into it. So in this story, you come back and revisit Carly Beth. Now, I'm going to go ahead and throw this out there. This book does retcon things. And not only retcons the ending to the first Haunted Mask book, but this book, according to the timeline, it completely also retcons Haunted Mask 2. Now, I actually think that there are some things about this book that can be applied and maybe tweaked a little bit to make sense to Haunted Mask 2, where they could have potentially all taken place on the same night, because the events are kind of, not too, related, and there could be some type of, legend story later on, that if Stein decides to write one, that can make those two stories tie together. These two stories tie together here. But anyways, yeah, this book does retcon a few things, but you're gonna have to look past that to enjoy the story. So Carly Beth, in this story, you get to visit her in the first person, as the first Haunted Mask book was told in the third person. In this book, you're gonna get into the mind of Carly Beth a little bit better off the bat. But anyways, keep getting sidetracked. So Carly Beth wakes up from, she's restless of sleep. It's a few days before Halloween, the year after the incident where she first put on the haunted mask. And it's revealed that Carly Beth has locked the haunted mask down in her basement. And she keeps having this urge, like this calling, to go down into her basement and put on the haunted mask. And there's a scene that's pretty tense filled, I would say. The first chapter comes in with a big bang. Carly Beth goes down into her basement. She makes her way, rummages through some clutter, and then she pulls out the box where she locked the haunted mask in. It still feels warm in the face. The eyes are glowing. The teeth are still realistic. The pointy ears, the green, the green texture, skin color to the mask still feels like skin. Very creepy. And she holds it up and is about to put it on, and then there is a blood-curdling scream she lets out. Then it cuts into the next day, where Carly Beth is riding the bus home from school. This is where we get to catch up with Sabrina. We get to catch up with Chuck and Steve, who Chuck and Steve in this story really haven't grown much from the first book, because this is now like the story that takes place after Haunted Mask 1, according to this timeline. And Chuck and Steve are still up to, playing pranks. They're still up to, their old antics. And, but they start to notice that Carly Beth has changed, and a lot of people seem to notice that Carly Beth has changed. And Sabrina, being Carly Beth's best friend, is the only person that Carly Beth has really told her story about the mask to, and Sabrina seems to be the only person that really understands and believes her. And Carly Beth expresses to Sabrina that she almost put the mask on the night before. Something's going on. Something's very weird. And Sabrina's saying, you need to get rid of the mask. And Carly Beth says, okay, well, I have to find a way to do that. And then, of course, they play a prank on Chuck and Steve during this scene. It's really funny, where they prank them to get off at the wrong bus stop. It was really funny. Finally, get to see Chuck and Steve getting messed with a little bit here. But they arrive to this. The best way to describe this is kind of like a volunteer daycare at this like horse stable place where they have like family games, and it's like this. It's like a town place where people go to hang out, and there's daycare services there. Carly Beth and Sabrina are like 12 or 13. I think they're like 12, but they work there for some reason, kind of avoiding child labor laws for some reason. But they have a job there, and they work there, and they have a group of 5-year-olds they watch, I think 5 or 6-year-olds around that age range. And there's this other girl that works there named Laura, who's she's private schooled. She really doesn't get out much. She doesn't meet much people other than the people she interacts with here at the horse stable. So, it's a couple days before Halloween. The kids are getting rambunctious. Carly Beth and Sabrina, and I think Laura as well, take the kids outside, let them blow off some steam, and go running around. Carly Beth and Sabrina, for some reason, just now started to notice that the horse stable in the back looks pretty dangerous. They see some kids running near there, and they go in to, try to stop the kids, and they try to peer around. And then they're stopped by Laura to say, get away from there, come back inside. They, of course, gather the kids and come back inside, and Laura explains to Carly Beth and Sabrina this urban legend or potential, true story that happened years back, where this boy had worn this mask. It was around Halloween. He had worn this mask that was pretty hideous and very real looking. And supposedly he went into the horse stable and scared a bunch of horses to death. And during that time he was scaring the horses, they trampled him to death, and he was found dead without his mask, and the mask went missing. And ever since then, there's been like that, that eerie, I don't know, tension-filled urban legend surrounding this stable, but the stables kind of went over a few facelifts over the years with like business choices and whatnot, and people have kind of forgotten about it. But after hearing that story, Carly Beth remembers that she thought she heard a horse go like whinny from inside that old stable. And Sabrina, brings it up to Laura as well. And Laura says, well, it's probably haunted, right? So it cuts into the next part of the story where Sabrina and Carly Beth have an assignment to do at school, kind of similar to the Haunted Mask 1 story, except this time they have to write a paper about like urban legends or something. And Sabrina chose the horse stable story, and she wants to go and investigate it to kind of gather some evidence to maybe help her paper out for her project. So Carly Beth decides, even though she's kind of scared, she doesn't want to admit it. Everybody thinks that she has changed, but she decides to go ahead and go with Sabrina, and they head up to the stable. And Carly Beth brings a bucket of carrots to kind of see if that draws out like ghost horses or whatnot. And when they get to the horse stable, they find freshly dug dirt in the front of the horse stable, which looks very odd. Like somebody was just there. And of course, there's this whole scene where, they put down the bucket of carrots, and there's these like ghostly, horse screams, and there's a, just, I don't want to spoil it because it kind of leads into the later part of the book, but something happens in there. The carrots go missing and whatnot. And then it's revealed that Sabrina was trying to play a prank on on Carly Beth using Chuck and Steve. But Chuck and Steve, after being called on the phone, it's revealed that Chuck and Steve forgot to come and just stayed at home. So something actually happened there. And then, of course, later on, Carly Beth, after I think Sabrina left or something, Carly Beth meets this strange boy hanging around the stable after she thought she saw somebody hanging out on the roof. And this boy's name is Clark. And Clark says, he jokingly says, hey, I live here. Actually, I'm kind of a homebody. I live close by. I come here a lot to hang out. And Carly Beth is like taken back by this Clark kid. She can't put her finger on it, but she thinks she has a suspicion that Clark may or may not be this ghost boy that's haunting the horse stable. So Carly Beth ends up, collecting her thoughts. She has to walk home, and she walks by the old mask store, which supposedly disappeared the year before and magically reappeared a year later around Halloween at the same time. She noticed that it was open, so she enters the mask shop, and lo and behold, the same shop owner is there. And Carly Beth, during this time, has kind of put two and two together that maybe this mask that this ghost boy was wearing is the same haunted mask as her mask. And she starts to say that this ghost boy might be coming back to get her mask. So she needs the shop owner to take it. And the shop owner is refusing to take the mask because he said it's going to destroy whoever possesses it. And plus, Carly Beth made the choice to purchase the mask. It's her problem now. Then he proceeds to kick her out, and Carly Beth is basically left with having to deal with the mask, and she goes back down to the basement to double check on the mask, and the mask makes this grisly message saying almost Halloween, which then it cuts to the final part of the book, which is it's Halloween now. And Carly Beth, instead of going trick-or-treating, she has decided to help Sabrina and Laura babysit the kids at this function for Halloween. I think all the parents get to come as well, but they're still doing this, gig. They get extra money. They go to the horse stable. The kids are there. So is this kid named Clark, and he's wearing this mask. And Carly Beth basically calls out Clark saying, hey, look, are you this ghost? And he goes, what are you talking about? And some things happen, and then a big revelation happens. Because I don't want, it gets, the story's only 100 or so pages, it's very easy to spoil. A big revelation happens on who or what may be behind the whole story, behind the stable. And there's a scene where Carly Beth, had brought the mask, and the person or whatever it is looking for the mask says, "That's my mask." And Carly Beth has to make a decision in the moment, which is this is actually one of my favorite moments in all of Haunted Mask books here. Carly Beth makes this, selfless decision to maybe use the mask to help save the day. And then she's, of course, helped by some other supernatural entities. And then the situation's absolved, and she may or may not have been able to, do away with the mask. And then there's a really good ending. I don't want to spoil it, but there's a very good ending involving the mask. I really enjoyed. It's probably my favorite ending to all of the Haunted Mask books. But yeah, that in a nutshell is the Scream of the Haunted Mask. Now, let's get into the positives of this story. Off the bat, I loved the way the story went for Carly Beth experiencing something different. Unlike most Haunted Mask books, this book kind of feels the most distant from Halloween, I would say. But it still has that fall atmosphere. It's still able to throw you into that same place the first book had you in some parts of the story. And on top of that, it added a deeper layer to Carly Beth's character that I was urging to see eventually in a future installment. And I feel like I got it here. I think Carly Beth was very well done. I like the internal monologue. I like there was genuine struggle with her, that she's not this perfect person after the events of the first book. Like, you get to see that. You get to see that she's struggling, maybe with PTSD. Maybe she's still struggling with a bit of insecurity. Maybe she's now, in a situation where she has to make people think that she is a certain way, so it helps her cope with things. You know what I mean? Like, there's a whole different layer, and there's many layers to her character as you get to pull back in this story. Even considering that this book was only 100 or so pages, it still managed to execute that very well. Honestly, I like how the Haunted Mask wasn't the focal point of the story here. As in most Haunted Mask books, the source of the scare is the body horror and the psychological horror that the mask causes here. But I think there's a residual effect that Carly Beth goes through in her own internalized struggles here. And there's a newer mystery aspect to maybe this ghost boy is haunting this stable. Maybe there's ghost horses, maybe there's an urban legend. Maybe the Haunted Mask has this root in, the town's history. And which also raises a lot of questions that never really got answered in the story, but they were very cool to think about while reading. Like stuff about the shop owner maybe being kind of like an antiquarian dealer of vintage masks, and maybe this mask is far older than we all assume. Maybe he never invented the masks, and it makes you think about a lot of stuff. Of course, those stuff go unanswered, which I'll get into the negatives in just a second. But yeah, that's there. Really good stuff. Honestly, the big climax, the big reveal, I loved it. Even though the horse stable wasn't the biggest cup of tea I can stomach for something like this, it worked. And what really made it work was the finale of it. I enjoyed that tremendously. The reveal was slightly predictable, but it was fun. And not to mention every bit in the end with Carly Beth and the Haunted Mask and the big villain reveal was awesome. And it had some of my favorite moments in Haunted Mask books near the end. I loved it. Seeing the side characters come back was also a treat. It feels like we're visiting old friends too. Really enjoyed that aspect of this book because I've watched the Haunted Mask episode so many times and I've read Haunted Mask, the book, so many times growing up. It feels like revisiting old friends. It honestly does. But the negatives here, the first negative off the bat are these little things that this book introduces. Like I said, this book, in the beginning of this video, I said that this book does retcon a few things. It does introduce some new ideas, and it doesn't really address them all perfectly. And part of that, I think, the main culprit here is the page constraints for this story A. I feel like if you cut out the HorrorLand side story in the back and Stein was able to make a full book, like 120, 130 pages, he would have went more in detail. I feel like this book suffered because of the page constraints here. And that might be an unpopular opinion. I know some people say this is a short and sweet story, but I actually think that it would have done better with more pages. I think. I'm pretty sure, pretty positive Stein would have leaned into some of these other elements here. Kind of like dealing with like the shop owner, there's this thought that the haunted mask goes back years, but it's stated in the first book. This is not really a spoiler either, but the shop owner created these faces, these masks. So did the shop owner create it years ago, or like there's really no correlation. Did the shop owner find the mask? Did the shop owner create the mask? Who knows? How did the mask end up back in the shop owner's possession? There's so many things that your mind is supposed to fill in the blanks for. That I think it could be a slight bit of genius, and it's also a slight bit of annoyance. Because I want to know. I want to know for sure what happened with that. Kind of frustrating on that department. And I guess the other negative I have is the sheer fact that it just retcons things. Me personally, I would have asked for a story that's kind of reminiscent. If you ever watched the Halloween movies from John Carpenter, Halloween 1 and 2, I would have much rather seen a direct follow-up with Carly Beth being like the main lead here, with continuing the events of the ending of the first book. I would have rather have seen that. This story, you do see her little brother Noah in the story. You do see her mom. You see her dad finally. I don't think her dad was in the first book at all. You get to see these characters again, but you obviously know that what this book is doing is it's just retconning the whole thing. And I think part of the problem on that aspect is that Stein tends to write sequel books loosely connecting to the previous book, to the point where you don't have to read the previous book to enjoy the sequel book. But I actually would say this one time, I have noticed this in Goosebumps, I actually think you should read the first book before reading this, because it clears up a lot of things. Because Carly Beth obviously is dealing with residual effects from the first story, and nobody's really going to understand that unless they read the first story. And since you don't get that much mask in this story, I think it's important to read the first book and then read this, which I think could help it, but it also kind of takes it back as well, because if I would have read this before Haunted Mask 1, I would have been spoiled about a couple things. So, yeah. There's that. And yeah, that's basically all the negatives I had. So, from a 0 to 5 stars, honestly, I think this book was pretty well done. I like how different it felt. Like I said, it does have its problems. The problems I said collectively, the one being it retcons a bunch of things I deducted. I'm not a really big stickler on this because Haunted Mask 2 retconned a lot of things. And I've heard that wanted the Haunted Mask retcons basically the whole franchise. So there's really no faithfulness to it. I'm going to be more fair on it because they each and every sequel retcons things on their own, accord. I'm just going to rate them more fairly when it comes to this, so I'm only going to deduct 0.2 on that. It's not the biggest retcon ever, but it does have those annoying little things that it does, erase. And then, for the other problem I mentioned, I deducted 0.4 off, just because, this is one of those problems for me, like the page constraints, really, it didn't elaborate on a lot of things I wanted to see elaborated on. And I felt like it was just one of those skim-through stories. Not skim-through to the point where the book was, ruined or anything, but it could have used a little bit more there. So, from a 0 to 5 stars, I ended up giving this a 4.4 out of 5. Very exceptional book. If you have never read Scream of the Haunted Mask, you need to try this out. Let me know in the comments section if you have read this book. Did you love this or did you hate this? I'm dying to know. I'll see you next time.